All right, you checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning in to Chargers Unleashed.
Another day here at Chargers Unleashed. Today we have a very special guest, Daniel Popper from his own Substack, Hops with Pop, as well as The Athletic. Here talking all things Los Angeles Chargers, talk about, a little bit about the upcoming season, some expectations, where this team may have gone right and wrong. But Daniel, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks for hopping on. This is I think a very interesting time for Chargers fans. Now it's kind of like the calm in between the storm, so to speak, where we had everything was draft and free agency. Then comes kind of preseason. There's still some free agency to be, but just kind of looking at the macro of this Chargers team so far, 2 seasons under Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz. How would you assess like what they've done, what they've accomplished from when they started to now? Again, incomplete right now, but do they meet your expectations from when they first came in? Exceeded? Not? Like, what are your kind of overall, just, are the Chargers in better hands now, expectations wise?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely in better hands. I think like they probably met my expectations last season. I was pretty high on what they were going to be able to do, partly because of the schedule, but partly because of just the belief I had in Jim Harbaugh. I think I had them projected at 10-7, playoff berth, losing in the first round, and that's effectively what happened. I think so from like a performance production standpoint, about met my expectations, but I think from like a culture resetting standpoint, both in terms of like in the locker room, but also in terms of like how they go about building the roster, they probably exceeded my expectations a little bit. Obviously I wrote a big feature at the end of last season about how Jim Harbaugh sort of brick by brick built the culture. And it was a fascinating process to watch sort of firsthand, being in that locker room every day at these games, at practice, starting in April, and just watching him bring a team together. Just on a human level, I found it very fascinating, and that probably exceeded my expectations a little bit, because you hear a lot about Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh gets hired as head coach of the Chargers, and you're hearing from people at various stops, and everybody in the football world knows him. And so, he builds winners, but I think the how was really interesting to find out. And that part of it, just his commitment to his own authenticity and really like believing in the team, and how he goes about doing it, and just being there for his players, participating in the workouts, the antics and meetings. It was all just really fascinating to watch. So, and then on the Hortiz side, he says early on it's going to be a 365-day process, and it's turning the bottom of the roster and all of that stuff. But seeing him really do that in year one, talk about some of the moves he made at the end of training camp. Easton Stick wasn't good enough in training camp last year, so he trades for a backup quarterback. They need a third safety, so he trades for Elijah Molden. Claiming Marcus Mayoff waivers in the middle of the season, getting these contributions from Eli Apple and all of these other players from the practice squad that were able to really contribute in some key moments or off the street. I think that was also really impressive. So, we'll see what happens in year 2. I find this to be a really interesting and revealing test for what this is. Last year there were weeks where you felt like going to the game, they were going to dominate, and they did. This season is going to be very different, and it's going to be a real test, and it's going to be interesting to see if like all of those things that I was talking about, the roster building approach, the culture, Harbaugh, et cetera, what those things look like against what will be a much stiffer test schedule wise.
And we're going to definitely get into that, because I think there's a lot of perspective on, if the team had 11 wins last year, then they've got to be better than that this year. And it's just a completely different situation. And we'll get to that. Any surprises on your end from Hortiz and Harbaugh so far? Things that they did that maybe caught you off guard, good or bad, other than the press conferences?
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't really a surprise. Harbaugh's old school in that sense that he doesn't want to give anything away, which is fine. But it's also my job to find stuff out. So
of course.
That's where you get the gridlock.
You both have a job.
Yeah, I don't know if anything was surprising. I mean, like, there are some moments with Jim Harbaugh that are like a little bit surprising, because you just don't know what he's going to be like as a person, And so, some of the stories he tells. I mean, I remember there was a moment at training camp last year where I was just milling about on the field, talking to some guys, and just hanging out while guys did their post-practice work, just seeing who was, putting that extra time and that kind of stuff. And I was just hanging out, and Harbaugh had gone and done a bunch of media obligations. And this is probably a half hour after practice in it. So he had finished all of that stuff. And he came back out onto the field and was flipping these sleds by himself. Like there was no one else around, but he had missed like the Ben Herbert post-practice fourth quarter finisher stuff because he had a media obligation. So he came back out and he was doing this by himself. And there was a kid like waiting at the fence, like screaming, like, Coach Harbaugh, can you sign my hat? Can you sign my hat? And he was paying this kid no mind because he was finishing, his sled flips. And so like, those are probably the moments that were a little bit surprising. Just like, not in the sense that, I expected something different, but I just didn't know what to expect from Jim. But I think like, as you compile all of those moments together, you get a real, picture of like who the authentic Jim Harbaugh is. And he really believes in doing it in the trenches with his players. And I think it shows in sort of how they play. I would say, just thinking through various things that surprised me, I was surprised by how the defense played. I thought they would be solid. I'd heard really good things about Jesse Minter, but for them to finish, as like a pretty consensus top 10 defense in terms of like the metrics that I look at, DVOA, expected points added, those types of things, obviously scoring defense wise, but when you wait for strength of schedule and those types of things, they were still, 9th, 8th best defense in the league. I think the way that unit came together was a little bit surprising. Particularly like the interior defensive line, that was like a weak point of the roster that I had. That ended up being like a real strength of the team. So, and on a more granular level, like Poona Ford was probably a little bit of surprise. So I think the little Jim Harbaugh moments, and then I think the defense as a whole, more of like from a football perspective, was a little bit surprising.
We'll talk about the defensive line here now, but first, folks, if you're watching, QR code bottom right hand corner for you for Hops with Pop Substack. Go check it out. He's got awesome interaction stuff going on with Chargers fans. You can go talk to Daniel all the time. He has live chats and he has stuff late at night where he can kind of give you his instant analysis on things. Also, subscribe to The Athletic, obviously, goes without being said.
Appreciate the QR code.
Yes, I got you.
Also, I saw you signed up today, so I appreciate you joining the House of Pop community, man.
See, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm like, I got to do this. I have to ask about the interior defensive line and kind of this. It was surprising last year. But like the life after Joey Bosa and Poona Ford, and it's wild how the Poona Ford side almost feels like it's the bigger concern of how do you replace Poona Ford, considering just the name of Joey Bosa. But they bring in Kyle Kennard, Jamari Caldwell, Naquan Jones, all these guys. What is the defensive line schematically or strategically like this year versus what it was last year? Like, are they just trying to replace one for one what they lost in Poona Ford and Joey Bosa to recreate that, or are they trying to create something new and improved?
Well, I think they wanted to get bigger on the interior. So I sort of separate those two position groups when I think about the team. So interior defensive line and edge rusher are two different things when I think about structuring the roster. I think that, on a basic level, they want the biggest guys they can possibly get playing on both sides of the lines.
So you and me are out. So you and me aren't playing defensive line.
Right, exactly.
Well, I came through for you. I'm out.
So Jim has mentioned multiple times this offseason, like we've gotten a lot bigger on the defensive line. You talk about Jamari Caldwell. You talk about Naquan Jones and Deshaun Hand and like the guys that they brought in. These are big dudes. And then you have Tito coming back. Justin Herbert put on weight. Tier Tart. They're a big group. So with interior defensive line, I think that in a perfect world, you are able to replace Poona Ford one for one. And I think like if Jamari Caldwell is what they think he can be, then, that's a possibility. Is that going to happen as a rookie? I don't know. What I do appreciate about what they've done on the interior is they've built a ton of contingencies in, right? They have a lot of depth. I think the big question with the interior is who is the guy? Like who really becomes the Poona Ford of this year he's a 3-down player. He's giving you production. He can defend the run. He can be a pass rusher. He can impact the game in multiple ways. Who is going to be that guy? And I think we're going to find out, is it a by committee approach? Is there one guy that really sort of takes that jump and takes that role that Poona Ford had last year? And you can sort of go through the guys, like who's it going to be, right? Like I think it could be Jamari Caldwell if he becomes what they think he's capable of being. Tier Tart, they believe in. I think there's a little bit of unknown there as far as, okay, he's playing more in a rotational role last year. When he goes from 25 to 30% of the snaps a game to 55 to 60% of the snaps a game, is he going to be the same type of efficient pass rusher and difference maker like he was last year? So it's a deep group. They've taken a bunch of swings and they have a lot of contingencies built in, but who's that guy that steps up? I think that's going to be really interesting. Justin Herbert can throw him into. They're planning on him taking a jump. Edge rusher wise, I think it falls on Thule, right? Like, I think, moving on from Joey is sort of an indication that, like, okay, they believe Thule Tuipulotu is ready to take that jump and be that number 2 edge rusher and move from sort of that third role into like a primary starting role. And that's why I sort of have him high up in my like guys that are very important to the season for the Chargers.
And I think that's one thing that was interesting. You hear about like the weight being added by Aboigbe and, it being good weight and all of that. Trying to think of a kind way of saying this, but what do you expect from him this year?
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, like it's hard to like say right now, okay, I can make an evaluation based on what this weight is going to do for him. When you're evaluating trench play, you can look great in shorts, which is always the phrase, right? It looks like you put on a bunch of weight and you look better, but like, what happens when the pads come on?
Kind of like
right?
running backs. Yeah.
That's what happens with me, at least when I'm evaluating. Like, okay, sure, put on weight, but like, okay, what happens when you're in those one-on-ones and it's helmet on helmet, pads on pads, it's physical, you're playing through contact, all of these things. So he's a guy I'll be watching. Absolutely. I mean, they drafted him in the 4th round for a reason, but he only played 26 defensive snaps last year for a reason too. So, he's in the plans, right? But they also wouldn't have signed, 2 defensive linemen and built out this room and drafted another defensive lineman in the 3rd round to, because they felt like he was really, really ready for this role. I think they built in contingencies for a reason. So we'll see when the pads come on.
Right now, okay, you and I are both married, so you probably might relate to this. My wife and I have this thing of like, find a problem, fix a problem. And then there are 2 ways of doing it, right? There's me, who, if I have a headache, give me the aspirin, give me the Tylenol, whatever. And my wife's more on the side of like, I want the warm towel, I want the lights off, I want to be soothed. Both can get to the same result. I elect mine, she elects hers. I kind of equate that over to like Chargers roster team building thing where find a problem, fix a problem. So last year, right, look at the biggest concerns of this Chargers team. I think clearly pass protection was one. They didn't have any outside explosiveness, really, and the run game really wasn't what they needed. Did they find the problem and fix the problem? And how did they do it? Did they do it by the aspirin, just like adding a player, adding something, or massaging, giving them more time with the coaching staff, another season to develop? Like, where do you stand on, did they fix the problems of last year?
Okay, so I think the number 1 biggest problem last year was pass protection on the interior of the offensive line. And I think that they made progress, right? They signed Mekhi Becton, who should be an upgrade at right guard. But my question is, did they do enough? So
they have the warm towel. They have the warm towel on the forehead.
Yeah, maybe they like tried to drink some extra water because it could have been like dehydration that was causing the headache, as opposed to, taking the 3 Advil and just, Yep. But again, like, did you have to drive to the store to get the Advil? How far away was the Advil? Like we can sort of stretch this analogy out, right? Like, maybe you drove to the CVS and they were out of Advil, but they did have some Pedialyte in the fridge. And so you drafted, right? So, so you bought that instead to try and conquer your dehydration, et cetera, right? So I think like if Mekhi Becton is able to play a full season, they have upgraded at right guard. I think that will have an effect on the rest of the interior offensive line. But what happens at those other 2 positions is a big part of whether they actually solved what I think was the biggest weakness last year. And part of that is the Zion Johnson experiment. Does it work at center? If it does work at center, who's at left guard? Is it Bradley Bozeman? Is it Trey Pipkins? Is it Jamari Salyer? Is it Branson Taylor? Who is it? And so I think they've taken steps towards being better in that area. I don't think personally that they've done enough to rectify, what happened last year. And there were positive moments,
of course,
as Joe Hortiz said in his press conference. I think that when push came to shove and they were in the biggest game of the season, they couldn't hold their own against
or
really
big
good
moments. We saw it so many times in critical moments where they just got bull rushed.
Yeah. So I think the jury's still out. I think they took steps, but I would have done a little bit more personally. I think, you talk about other weaknesses offensively. It was the Lad McConkey show. He was the only guy that could consistently beat man coverage, and
literally,
or 2 or 3. He put up 197 yards in that Texans game while getting triple covered. So, but they really needed that outside presence that could attack down the field, whether that be speed, whether that be, contested catchability, outside the numbers, just to create more space over the middle of the field to Lad for Lad to operate. And in that specific weakness, I think that they found the Advil and they took as much as they could, right? Like I think they did a really good job of attacking.
It took like 5 Advils,
right? So they go out and they get a guy in Mike Williams who does that thing exactly very, very well, and has done it with this quarterback specifically at a very high level. That signing made sense to me. Like, I was calling for them to trade for Mike Williams midway through last year. I went back and looked. I think I wrote that in like November. So I've been on that train for a while. It just made a ton of sense. Second round pick, you get another, outside guy with contested catchability and Trey Harris. In the 5th round, you get Keandre Lambert-Smith, who brings you a little speed element on the outside. So you have now outside receivers that are going to be able to threaten defenses vertically, which I think, that weakness they were able to address in a pretty overwhelming fashion. And then running game wise, I would agree with you. It never really got to where they wanted it to go. I think Mekhi Becton, if he plays and is on the field, will help them. I think it's very easy to visualize Joe Alton, Mekhi Becton clearing some big holes. But I think, equally as important, they really upgraded the running back room. And I am extremely high on Omarion Hampton. I think this guy is going to be like a fan favorite by week 2. Like I was just on with Money earlier this morning doing the Chargers Weekly podcast, and I said a similar thing. But like I think there's going to be a play in week 1 where he gets the ball, he gets through a hole, and he just runs over a safety in the second level. And then what the next home game is week 3, right? Home against the Broncos. And he's I think you're going to see a ton of Omarion Hampton jerseys in the stands by week 3. Yeah. That's just so I think in that sense, the running backs are better than they were last year, and that should help the running game.
So on that note, I feel like Najee Harris almost had like I don't want to say bait and switch, but like he comes in thinking he's a bell cow, and then all of a sudden Omarion Hampton comes in, and like both of them kind of, in terms of like availability and durability, like they kind of have checked those boxes. Now they're very different players, clearly, but do you see this as a running back by committee? It might start that way, but like, is it going to turn into the Omarion show like by the end of this?
No, I think like a really good running game, you need 2 backs. So I wouldn't even look at it as like bell cow versus like secondary option. I just think you need 2 good ones, and I think they got 2 good ones, and I think like with the Najee signing, like I feel like they looked at what happened last year and they tried to piece it together, and
especially the Gus stuff.
Gus was in and out, and he was supposed to be what I think they hope Najee is, which is, he's going to get what's blocked for him. He's going to be physical. He's going to give you 17 games. He's going to be there. And that just didn't happen with Gus. And he had the ankle issues that bothered him all year, only played 11 games. J.K. Dobbins obviously had a bounce back year, but the stretch he missed, 13 to 16, weeks 13 to 16, that was a big stretch. They were able to overcome it, but the running game faltered significantly when he missed time. So I think now they have 2 guys that they feel like are going to be available. They're going to be able to run the way that they want to run, which is downhill, physical. It's going to fit into the philosophy. And so I think you want 2 backs. I think Najee Harris would look at it and say, you need some sort of secondary option behind you to be effective. And we'll see how it plays out.
I've picked up on this a few times now. When we're talking about Mekhi Becton, like there's a very large asterisk in the if category of if Mekhi Becton can stay healthy, which again, you could say that about pretty much anyone on the offensive line. If Rashawn Slater stays healthy, if Joe Alt stays healthy, but it sounds like are you concerned about that injury possibility more so than others? Because like, I know how important, it seems like a lot of success is based on Mekhi Becton, not necessarily playing well, which he probably will, but as long as he stays healthy, we're good. Like, is it different for him than with Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater and Justin Herbert and Derwin James, or are you just thinking that because he's the new free agent?
I mean, I'm a little bit more concerned than those other players you listed. I think that I've experienced similar situations in the past. And so I'm just cautioning because of those experiences. And anybody that's been a Chargers fan for, 5 years would remember the Brian Bulaga signing. Yes?
Yep.
Okay. I think at this time in that season, which was 21, I believe, 2021, at this time in that season, after the Brian Bulaga signing, everyone was like, right tackle is shored up. The Chargers are good to go. And he got hurt in the first week of the season, So like that, I mean, and then it was Storm Norton, So like they are, if Mekhi Becton is unable to play in for any stretch of the season, like you're looking at the exact same interior as last year. And so I've seen this, a story happen, where it didn't work out, with Brian Bulaga, and it turned into a messy situation. Now, I think this is a deeper team. I think they have more contingency plans. But it's part of my analysis that I think that they just didn't quite do enough on the interior to get it to a point where it's like improved enough from last season. And that's just my opinion.
We're talking to Daniel Popper from Hops with Pop and also The Athletic. Let's kind of switch gears to the defense a little bit for a second. And I think the secondary for me going into last season was a very big question mark, like a risk of like, oh, to your point, like I was just surprised with how incredible that secondary coaching staff, Jesse Minter, Clinkscale, everyone was able to get that group in sync. That being said, a bunch of new names this year brought in free agency, especially in the draft as well. But do you think there is adequate or too much pressure on the second year Tarheeb Stills, Cam Hart's? Like, do you have concerns about the secondary, or is it kind of like in Jim and Clink, I trust?
I'm not too concerned. I think like the way I would frame it is I think they've built out a deep corner room. I think they have, a number of guys that could play, including no, I'm saying like could play and you like functionally, like you'd feel good about them playing, right?
I mean, Marcus May played last year, so I see your point. Yeah.
No, like, but like, Tarheeb Still, Cam Hart, Dante Jackson, Benjamin St. Juste, Ja Taylor, Dean Leonard. I would feel okay with all of those guys playing, right?
Okay.
I think the question I have with the corner room is like where, and it's kind of a question I have about a number of groups, up and down the rosters. Like, where is the blue chip? Where is the like plus player? And I think they have a lot of depth around the roster, but we're gonna have to wait and see who is that plus type player, because I think there are players in the corner room that have showed that those type of flashes, right? I think you start with the 5th round guys from last year. Cam Hart and Tarheeb Still both played some good football. Cam Hart battled some injuries, right? He had a couple concussions. He had an ankle injury. He got knocked out of the playoff game with a shoulder injury. So like if those guys take big steps, right? If Tarheeb Still like builds on his 4 interception season from last year and turns into a 8-9 interception guy, which is certainly in the realm of possibility. Okay, now you have that blue chip guy, but you're also in that baking in a certain amount of development and improvement. And unfortunately, like until the season starts, that's totally unknown. So I like the depth of the group. I think they have a lot of guys that can play. The question is, who are those guys? And is there a player in that room similar to interior defensive line that is able to distance themselves and really become that type of like blue chip talent that you need in the corner room?
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like they did a good job of kind of raising the floor, but we don't know how high the ceiling will go.
Exactly. I think you could apply that to a number of positions, right? Like I think you could apply that to interior defensive line. I think you could apply that to corner.
Running back for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there that like Omarion Hampton to me is a blue chip type guy, right? Those two positions though specifically, I look at and I say, okay, the depth is great. Like they have a lot of guys that have played a lot and have played well. But
and I think that's one of the things that Chargers fans are used to, or maybe not used to, is having that, because in the past it's always been kind of the opposite, where there is the blue chip, quote unquote, but then underneath that, if something goes wrong with them, they get hurt, injured, whatever, like then there's no depth underneath. And so now it's kind of the opposite, which you could argue might be more sustainable if you have a bunch of C's and B's versus 1A and 1F, like I think long-term success-wise, it probably paints a better picture for you.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, there's just more contingencies around the roster and backup plans and plans A, plans B, plans C, and they're all like functional. Whereas before, I think you had some situations where you were like, this guy has to make a jump if this unit is going to be functional. Whereas now it's like, it would be great if this guy makes a jump, i.e. Justin Herbert. If he doesn't, we have this plan, Deshaun Hand. We have this plan, Jamari Caldwell, this plan, Naquan Jones, and sort of down the list.
Right. Like last year, if Hayden Hurst is out, you're relying on Will Dissly to be your pass catching tight end for the season. And now there's a lot more options for pass catchers, right, generally speaking.
Yeah. And it was a process, right? Like they had like last year was last year. They pieced it together on limited cap space. I think this year, when they had the cap space, you saw the vision, more fully fleshed out, where like they're gonna build depth. That's gonna be the priority. And then hopefully you get a Poona Ford situation where you hit on a free agent or you hit on a draft pick and they turn into that blue chip talent that elevates the ceiling, as you mentioned, of the position group.
Now, optics wise, a couple more for you before we get you out of here. Optic wise, looking at this Chargers 2024 season, it felt like there was a lot of now you saw more explosiveness because of Ladd McConkey, to your point. Like he was basically the one guy that was giving you explosive, quote unquote, easy yards. But otherwise, for the most part, it felt like it was a lot of like scratching and clawing. There were some J.K. Dobbins moments too, but it felt like there were no real easy moments for Justin Herbert in this offense to where, throw it 5 yards, the guy takes off and runs for 70. You see these all the time with some Super Bowl contending teams. Now, they bring in so much firepower. But I want to kind of maybe ask you before I give my opinion, but what should the expectations be of that firepower with a Conklin and with a Gadsden and with the Trey Harris, with Mike Williams and Ladd and all these guys with the running game?
KLS, you can throw him in there.
Yeah. So like, should we be expecting fireworks? Should we be expecting like a little bump from last year? Like, what is the bar that we should be kind of aligning to here? Because like, I feel like some people are like, oh, number one offense, he's gonna blow it out of the water. And then some people are like, they're not going anywhere. These guys suck. Like, where would you kind of put your expectations on what this offense would look like from a execution perspective?
I think it will be a more explosive offense in both phases. I think that Justin Herbert's going to be able to access the deep part of the field in the passing game in a way that he wasn't last year just because of the personnel. Tight end.
What does that mean? Like jump ball? Like down, like deep shots downfield?
Right? Like you have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who's an outside receiver who runs 4.3 and can attack defenses with speed. You have Trey Harris, who, can do that. I think once he gets moving and gets up to speed, he has the ability to really break off those post routes and win down the middle of the field. And then he's also a contested catch guy. Everyone has seen what Mike Williams can do down the field. So you have players that can access the deep part of the field in different ways, whether that's speed, whether that's contested catch, size, etc. And so, how many times last year did we see Justin Herbert try to make a throw downfield to somebody in a 50-50, contested catch situation? And it was just no shot, right? Like, so you have a bunch of guys now that can access that part of the field in different ways. You have tight ends now that can attack defenses vertically down the seam, primarily Oronde Gadsden, right? Their 5th round pick. That's going to be his role. You have Conklin, who has been a very productive receiving tight end over the course of his career, more of like a short to intermediate area type player. And this all leads to, less attention on Ladd McConkey, who is a very explosive player, and they can find different ways to use him. So I think they'll be more explosive there. I think they'll be more explosive in the running game because of, primarily Omarion Hampton. I think when you talk about the offense overall and what their ceiling is, that depends on how the interior of the offensive line plays. That's just what it is. You can add, every offensive weapon you want, but if you can't protect the quarterback, then it doesn't really matter. And that's just football. That's what it is.
And I've thought about that too, because I think the problem with the Chargers last year specifically, or a problem for the Chargers last year, in my opinion, was I feel like you need to have one or the other. Either you need to have weapons that can get open quickly to make up for the lack of protection, or you have protection that can help sustain time while folks maybe not able to get open as easily. But you can't not have both. And last year, they, aside from Ladd, didn't have either. This year, at least they have more weapons to where if the interior offensive line is weak, they still have guys that might be able to get open or take the 50-50 ball or go for the screen and take it 50 yards or whatever. So at least they have some kind of like in case of emergency break glass moment. Whereas last year it was just like, what was he supposed to do?
Right. I would add a third element in there. Run game. Run game matters. It's all tied together. So if you can't run the football at all, that means pass rushers are teeing off. It means that they were good in the play action game, but it just means that, there's just less focus from the defense on trying to stop the run. And that means they can devote more resources to the back end and make it more difficult for you. And so, that leads to coverage sacks and those types of things. So I would say all of that's related, but the fact that they couldn't really run the ball consistently was also a factor in some of the protection stuff, because if a defensive lineman is not worried about your run game, they're pinning their ears back, and that makes it a lot harder to block. And also, if you can't run the ball, you're getting into a lot of downs and distances that are not ideal. And if you're in a lot of 3rd and 7 to 10, that's when defenses can blitz. That's when defenses can run stunts and games. And that's what the Chargers struggled with last year. So it all ties together, but the run game is certainly a factor in what you're talking about.
One of the things I think Chargers fans, myself included, covering this team, enjoy most about what you bring to this fan base and folks covering the team is your kind of attention to data when making your informed decisions. I'm not trying to just pump up your ego here for a second. So I wanted to ask you, moving forward to 2025, statistically, data-driven approach, what would you say are maybe a few key statistics that you can, or Chargers fans might want to look at when the season's going on or towards the end of the season as like barometers of success for this Chargers team?
Yeah, so one I would point to specifically is that they had the second highest rate in the league of rushing attempts that went for 0 or negative yards. So that is something that like, and this is something that you don't even need the number, but you can watch the games and right. Like, but I'm saying like this coming season, that is a big indicator because they had some explosive runs. Like when you look at success rate, it's pretty low. They were like 24th in the league, but they were actually middle of the pack in expected points added, which means that they were breaking off explosive runs, which raised their efficiency. But in terms of how they were on every single snap and whether they were successful on every, like an explosive run is going to elevate your expected points added per play. But when you look at, all successful runs being equal, whether it's a 60-yard run or, a 3-yard run on 3rd and 2, they were 24th. And a lot of this came down to they had way too many runs that went for 0 negative yards that got them behind the sticks. And so I think that's part of why you look at these running backs they brought in, Najee Harris, Omarion Hampton, Rocket Sanders, like they are trying to move forward. They want guys that are going to be able to play through contact. So that's one big thing I'm looking at with the run game is like, can they eliminate some of these negative or 0-yard runs,
basically wasted plays.
And improve their success rate in that area. And like, that could mean like getting 3.5 yards on first down. You take that, right? Like, I think there were a lot of opportunities last year where, they weren't able to, get what was blocked for them at minimum, And so I think the improved running back room will help them. But that's one number that I'm focused on.
Now, people will knock the Najee Harris 3.9 yards per carry, but expand that out for a season. That's a 1,000-yard rusher, 4 straight seasons. So beggars can't be choosers here.
Yeah, and also like if they went into the season with just Najee, that's one thing. But to pair Najee with an explosive back like Omarion Hampton, who also has the physicality that you're looking for, you can see how those two pair together. And I think Najee's value increases when he has a player that has that home run ability playing alongside him or, rotating with him.
Last topic for you, Pop. I saw a recent piece from you, 9-8 prediction for the Chargers team. And before folks freak out, hold on. Like, let's think about this in perspective. Strength of schedule, insane this year versus last. Team very different. I kind of want to just double click on the 9-8 thing with you and maybe give you an opportunity to kind of expand on your expectations of this Chargers team. Do you see 9-8 as a failure or as a success? And where does that lead to them going in the playoffs? Like, are you happy about the 9-8 when the season ends and they're in the playoffs, or are you calling for pitchforks because they missed the playoffs at 9-8?
I mean, for me personally, like the record doesn't really matter. I'm just going to cover it as a journalist.
Fair,
it is,
of course.
I'll tell you what's going on. That's sort of my approach. To me, it's a majority of my prediction is baked into the schedule. I think it's a really, really, really challenging schedule, and that stretch in December is no joke.
Yeah,
like
they better bank some games that they win early on,
right? But you think about some of the runs to the playoffs the Chargers have had. There's a couple games in there down the stretch where you can just sneak a win in. Where is that down the stretch this season? Once December hits, it's Eagles, it's Cowboys, it's Broncos, it's game after game there, Texans, like all these playoff teams, right? And I just think that it's going to be a little bit more of a test than last year. And
for sure.
Right. So I it's tough to look at that schedule and say, yeah, they're going to go 11-6, right? They're going to go 12-5, and I always go back to like, okay, what does the schedule look like? In my gut, do I feel like it's a challenging schedule, a less challenging schedule, right? That's where I start with record prediction. But secondarily, I go like, okay, what were the limiting factors for this team last year? And did they do enough to fix it? And for me, and I've been banging this drum for months, I felt like the biggest weakness was the interior offensive line. And now going into the season, they're projected to have two of the same guys, in that group. So I have worries about that. And so I combine those two things where like the biggest weakness on the roster, I don't think they improved enough. And they're playing a schedule that's 3 to 4 times as challenging as the schedule last year. It's tough for me to sit there and be like, yeah, definitely playoff appearance. They're going to have to grind it out. Like they're going to have to grind it out, and they're going to have players in this roster step up and be blue chip players. And it's like, who are those guys? It? I think it's possible. Yeah. Like I think 9-8 could get them in the playoffs. Like I think things would have to break their way for them to get to 10, 11, but it's just not going to be, there aren't going to be the cakewalk weeks that there were last year, because the Raiders aren't the Raiders last year either. Right. They won both of those games. Now you're going up against Pete Carroll and you got to stop Ashton Genty. Like, it's just like you go through, the Titans of last year are not the Titans of this year. They're going to be way improved at quarterback.
The Jags got Travis Hunter. They got all kinds
yeah. And also the Titans invested heavily in their offensive line. Like this is not going to be the type of game that it was the previous season. They're going to be better. Right. Like, so, you look at some of these weeks and it's like, okay, like I think 9-8's like, yeah.
Totally. Well, I think I wanted to give you the opportunity to be like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like going 9-8 against teams that are like predominantly playoff teams, Chargers fans would dream about that years ago. Like Chargers fans generally watch Chargers lose to the good teams and beat the bad teams. Yeah. So that would be a flip this year if they went 9-8. That would mean that they beat a bunch of playoff teams.
Yeah, and Navarro Bowman said it himself earlier this week when we got a chance to talk to him. We were like, well, where does the defense have to take a step? Where do you want to see your linebackers take a step? He's like, we got to do it against the elite quarterbacks. He said we did it against average quarterbacks last year. This is a direct quote. We got to do it against elite quarterbacks, and that's just the reality, right? So it's like, I was very impressed with how they built the roster with limited resources last year. I think that they built a culture. I think that they got a ton of improvement up and down the roster. But part of 11-6 in a playoff appearance was the schedule.
It was.
It just was. That's an objective fact. And so in order to get back to that level and be 11-6 this year, they have to be a much better team. Like they're not going to be the same team as last year and get to 11-6. That's just a reality. So the question is, have they improved enough to compensate for a much more difficult schedule? And that's where I think that they maybe haven't improved enough to get back to 11-6. I think, and I wrote this, I think they're going to be in the mix. I think they're going to hit that stretch in December and it's going to be like, all right, let's see what it is. And, is 9-8 enough? Is it not? I don't know. It could be, probably not, but maybe it sneaks you in the 7th seed. That's possible. So that's how I'm framing it. I think they're going to be in the mix come December, and that 5-game stretch to end the season is going to determine if they get in the playoffs or not. And I'm predicting them with a winning record, and I think they'll be right on the edge.
It is kind of fascinating. Last year, it felt like the responsibility was, can the Chargers just do what they were supposed to do? And for the most part, they won the games they were supposed to win, and then they pretty much didn't win the games that they weren't. If you just use that same formula this season against the teams that they're going up against, like, the numbers don't add up the same as they did last year to the 11-12 wins people saw.
Exactly.
You're going up against a ton of teams that are supposed to be better than you. And so you're going to have to do what you're not, quote unquote, supposed to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you look through it. It's like, where are the weak points of the roster of the schedule? Like you could throw the Raiders out there. Sure. But I think they're going to be better under Pete Carroll. You could, at the Giants.
Maybe
sure.
The Dolphins, Colts, Vikings, Titans stretch. Maybe. But even that, like, your floor is still pretty good.
Right. So, I mean, Jags, sure, throw the Titans in there. Colts, sure. Dolphins, I guess. Giants. So what's that? 5 games?
Yeah, that's probably that stretch.
Get me to 11. Like, to get to 11, you're going to have to beat really good football teams.
Yeah, I think I had him at 10. I think that's where I had him. And even that was hard.
So, I mean, going back to last year, what was like the best win of the season in terms of a team they beat? Cincy?
Probably. And even that,
against Denver
barely.
too. Against Denver. I think
first one was a rookie quarterback, first game kind of thing. Like,
right. And they Justin Herbert put him on his back for that second Denver game. I mean, they got their asses kicked up front, and he was pressured on 50% of his dropbacks or whatever, and he was just like went God mode, So, it's Denver twice, and then probably Cincy. He didn't even make the playoffs. Otherwise, your wins are against twice against Vegas, New England, Atlanta, Tennessee, Cleveland, New Orleans, Carolina, right? Like it's gonna be different. That's, I guess, like the reason I projected that win-loss total is because that's the point that I wanted to make.
100%.
All right. Like this is going to be a whole different ball game this year. And that's what happens.
It's a lot of playoff football.
You win football games, you finish second in the division, you play a second place schedule. And so like that means you're playing tougher teams. And so that's the point I wanted to make, is to, show fans and have them understand that this is going to be different. It's going to be different. It's going to be every week. You got to come out
intense,
outside of like maybe those 5, but who knows, right? But like you're going to have to come out every week and play really good football to get back to where you were last year. It's a tougher road. It just is.
The good news is that Chargers fans will have all things Chargers related covered by the one Daniel Popper from Hops with Pop and The Athletic. Also, for the millionth time, please go subscribe to The Athletic. Helps him out. Incredible work, by the way. I think everybody knows that. I don't need to pump review go up anymore. QR code, bottom right. Go subscribe to Hops with Pop. Bunch of stuff you can do there and access more from Daniel Popper. Dan, this is fun. Honestly, I like conversations like this that kind of just start organically and then just roll. And I probably am going to always be the Advil guy. I will always take Advil. And I just have to accept some people do it differently, and that's okay. But
I'm an Advil guy.
But when they don't...
if I have a real headache, I go straight for the meds.
Yeah, but don't come to me complaining if like the warm towel and the dark lights don't work.
Here's the question though. So there are times where my wife will pose a problem, but she doesn't want a solution. She just wants to commiserate.
Oh, that's the whole. We're talking therapy 101 right now.
So how does that factor into our analogy when there's a roster hole? Let's figure out how to fit this into the analogy.
We won 11 games, Popper.
Yeah, I'm aware. Okay, let me just say this. This thing is headed in the right direction. And I think that this is going to be a fascinating season because it's going to test them in a way that they weren't tested last season.
Yes.
And that should be exciting. Like, let's see what these guys are made of. Let's see what Justin Herbert, Derwin James, Khalil Mack, all these guys are made of. Let's see if they can take a step as a group and play a tougher schedule and get back to where they were last year. Like, let's see. I think that is to me what is going to make this season really interesting. Is okay. Now you're playing a second place schedule. Can you do it? Can you play the best of the best and still get to the playoffs? Yeah,
this is going to be a lot more high stakes, intensity, playoff feel football than Chargers fans are used to.
But that's how you want it. That's how you want it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. That's how you want it. Chargers fans should want to be playing this type of schedule to see what their guys are made of, and it's going to be fun. Absolutely.
And Jim Harbaugh is pumping that every single week. Like he loves bringing the opportunity to showcase what you got. Like that's his thing. Pop, you're outstanding, man. Thank you so much. Go check out Popper's latest. He has 1 through 20 ranked most impactful players for this Chargers 2025 success. I think obviously we know Justin Herbert is one. But after that, go check out, see what the rest is. Anything else you want to tell the great friends before we get you out of here?
No, that's all, man. Subscribe to the Substack. Check my stuff out in The Athletic. Appreciate it.
Cool, man. Daniel, thanks so much. We'll see you soon over at training camp. Otherwise, enjoy the week.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.